All right, shall we start this thing? It looks like we've got quite a few people here with us. And I'm Molly Beauregard, and I want to welcome Marcus Anthony. Ed and I are both just delighted to welcome all of you. I can see some of your names to the first presentation in the program in Creativity and Consciousness for the 23-24 academic year. Tonight we have futurist Marcus Anthony speaking on what I think is a particularly interesting and important topic, reclaiming your authentic self during the AI explosion. Marcus first came to our attention, to Ed and my attention, through the Society of Consciousness Studies, where all three of us are members. And we have a rather large group on a listserv. And the conversation moves pretty easily between poppy, fizzy, over my head, completely fascinating, and wow. And over the past year or so, I quickly identified Marcus as a wow contributor. His comments managed to bridge the gap between super heady and intellectual and totally approachable and makes sense to me, which is the best kind of way to talk about things that could be very challenging to understand. So it was with that bias that Ed and I decided to invite him. We thought he would be a good fit for this group. Some of you I know have attended many of these lectures. Some of you are likely new to this group this evening. So I want to give you a brief introduction to Marcus, his bio, and then away we will go. Marcus is a futurist and an author who seeks to deepen our understanding of future and beyond, our typical focus upon economics and technology. He's interested in exploring the areas of philosophy, psychology, and spirituality in relation to the challenges and opportunities of the digital age. He's the director of Mind Futures and a member of World Futures Federation and the Darwin Project Council. Anthony is currently an associate professor, and you will all be impressed that he's gotten up at like 5 in the morning to join us at the Foresight and Strategy at Beijing Institute of Technology in China. There he teaches courses such as Artificial Intelligence and the Future of the Mind, Making Sense of the Digital Society, and Introduction to Future Studies. His most recent project is centered upon his book, Power and Presence, Reclaiming Your Authentic Self in a Digitalized World. I have it, and I've read it, and it's a really wonderful, interesting, and approachable book about a very complicated area. Anthony's also written several other books, including Champion of the Soul and Discover Your Soul Template. He's also published numerous articles in academic journals on popular media outlets. Anthony is a passionate speaker who engages his audience with his personal insights and research. He just asked if he could tell us stories, and we enthusiastically gave him a double thumbs up. Yes, yes, tell us stories and share with us whatever it is that you're excited about sharing in your personal thoughts on these subjects. He invites us to rethink our sense of who we are and how we can create deep futures for ourselves and for others. It's a great privilege and honor to invite Marcus Anthony to the program in Creativity and Consciousness. And Marcus, before you speak, I want to give Ed the opportunity to potentially add a few comments as well, and then away we go.
Thanks, Molly. Actually, I'm just thinking about it. I'll save my remarks towards the end, and we're thrilled to have Marcus. So I think we could just turn it over to him. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Ed and Molly. I can't actually see the comments. If I do put them up, I think it cuts out too much on my screen. So, but if anybody makes an interesting comment and you want to share it with me during the presentation, then by all means, just interrupt me and tell me about it. Okay, so my talk today is called Reclaiming Your Authentic Self During the AI Explosion, which basically is the last year or so since ChatGPT came out in, was made public in November of last year. But the subtopic is developing deep futures with embodied presence and integrated intelligence. So my focus is not only on technology, but also on the human relationship with it. Okay, so let's move right along here. And okay, so this is a little picture here of Zhuhai, where I am. I'm not actually in Beijing, believe it or not. I'm actually near Hong Kong. And this bridge here you see in the top left-hand corner, yeah, I believe is the longest continuous bridge in the world. It goes from Zhuhai right over to Hong Kong. I think it's 30 or 40 kilometers long, something like that anyway. It's a wonderful trip over there. And Zhuhai is a coastal town, so that's why it looks rather nice on the coast here. It is very hot here, I've got to say, though, for 7 months of the year, and livable for about 5 months. Okay, so basically today I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself, because I think it's important to tell you who I am. A little bit about what critical future studies is, and then I'm going to explain some ideas like integrated intelligence, money and machines, futures versus deep futures, a concept I call digital wisdom. Then I'm going to, right near the end, I'm going to talk about the idea of making AI in our own image, in a godlike way, and the potential of creating a web of wisdom, and the opportunities that are ahead, as well as some possible threats, you might say. Okay. Okay, we've pretty much already introduced this part, and since we're a bit short of time, I might just mention I am actually a teacher and researcher here at the Beijing Institute of Technology. I teach some courses that I like to teach related to future studies, like artificial intelligence and the future of the mind, sense-making in the digital society. When I came here, they made me an English teacher because they saw I was a white guy from Australia. But after persisting, they eventually trusted me enough to let me teach future studies. So that's a really great opportunity. And don't worry, I know it's China, but they let me out twice a year for exercise and stretching. But other than that, it's all good. I call myself a social media influencer, not influencer, because I'm just starting out in that area. I've got a new YouTube channel called Power and Presence, which you might like to check out if you like. Now, I think it's important, besides my professional resume, to tell you a little bit about my life story, because what I'm sharing with you today is very much emerges from my own life experience. And this is really big picture futures. And we can't pretend that it's purely a function of science or rationality, because that's certainly not the journey that I've taken. So I've just outlined a few parts of my life, which I'll quickly go through. Of course, like everybody else, I had a childhood. My childhood featured some strong emotional problems, and I would call it the original pain. Basically, I grew up feeling that I was completely unlovable, and but I believe that whatever we carry with us into adulthood, in a way, we're asked by the universe or God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, to be responsible for that, and to develop a conscious relationship with it. So I don't see that as a bad thing. In fact, I've seen it as an enormous opportunity to grow as a person. I think we're all called upon to deal and process with some issues that we have, and our civilization as a whole as well. When I was up to about 25, though, I became quite a strong skeptic. I didn't really believe in anything that might be considered paranormal or something you couldn't measure or see. And I think that was a function of my deep disappointment with the world as I grew up. So I know I had a deep level of anger and disappointment in the world, and I kind of rejected the world. And this is not an uncommon thing, actually. It's quite a common resonance that people have within their psyches. So when I was about 26, though, I started to read a few things which opened me up a little bit, and then I started to use dream work and light trance states to see more deeply into my own psyche. And I was quite surprised as anyone, that I actually had quite a bit of ability and in the area of seeing or visionary states. I'll just tell you one quick story which really did break open my worldview. When I was 26, I met a woman who was basically a psychic or a fortune teller. She gave me a short reading, and I ended up going to her a meditation group on the outskirts of Coffs Harbour, a small town in Eastern Australia, which you never heard of probably. But one night in the meeting, she said that she'd had all these dreams about UFOs the previous night. And she said, last time this happened, the newspapers were full of stories about UFOs. So I think if you go out about 2 o'clock in the morning, you'll see something. So I took up this offer. In fact, this is the subject of my next YouTube video as well. So I set my alarm, and it was July, I think, and I got up at 1:45 a.m. because I went to bed about 11. And as soon as I stepped out my front door, I looked up into the sky. I saw this huge ball of glowing white light with a corona just floating silently across the sky, basically right in my field of vision, perhaps a few hundred meters in the air, but there was no sound, and it I really don't know. I had no idea what it was. It was just a great ball of light, and then it basically sailed out over the ocean behind the houses. That by the time the ocean was behind the houses, so it disappeared after about 30 or 40 seconds. So then I ran down to the beach to look around for this thing, whatever it was. It looked to be quite big. I couldn't see it. About after an hour, I came back to the house. I walked back up the street. I looked up to the sky again, and then I saw something different, but equally as amazing. I saw a formation, or it's hard to say. It may have been one object of orange glowing discs or lights, which were in a kind of a double V formation. So one V inside the other. And this, again, that was completely silent. There was no noise. It was directly above my head, and it sailed down in a different direction, down the coast, and disappeared after a minute or so. It appeared, like I say, it appeared to be one object or a series of objects. I'm not really sure, but it was certainly like nothing I've ever seen before. So that really opened up my mind to the fact that we may be living in a universe that is not perhaps represented fairly in our academia and our Western civilization. I don't know what those things were, but it's interesting that Leslie Halverson, the woman that told me about it, was somehow able to intuit that from dreams. So I had to completely reconsider my own worldview. So that's why I started to get into things like dream work. So I've recorded my dreams now for about 30 years. Now, when I was about 30, I started to get into emotional healing. I realized that just dream work and visionary work is not really enough to heal. You can learn a lot about the psyche and the symbolism. So I worked with people in a deep emotional healing in New Zealand, actually. And that really enhanced my intuition as well, because when you develop your emotional intelligence at a deep level and you feel deeply, you also start to intuit deeply. So this added another layer to my intuitive ability. And there are some amazing people in that group that I could tell you about, but maybe if someone has a question about it, I will later. But these people could see extremely deeply. Basically, I was transparent before them. After about the age of 36, I decided to go back into reading and writing and intellect. I hadn't read a book for 5 years because I believed that I was too much in the head, and I decided to focus on my body and on the psyche for 5 years. But at 36, I embarked on a PhD. I decided to study future studies, even though it's not the most well-known topic area, and the university that had it wasn't the highest ranking. And I found I had a natural ability, again, to use the intuitive mind during research. You can find a bit about that in my book. I think it's called How to Channel a PhD, or I wrote that about 10 years ago. After finishing my PhD, about the age of 40, though, I found it very hard to find work in a university. Most universities rejected me, which was hard to take. But after a while, I just sort of went with the flow. I wrote some books. And after about 10 years of rejection, I then got a couple of part-time jobs in universities, and eventually managed to secure a full-time one where I am now in China. Okay. I also practice mindfulness at this time because I saw it was very important to be able to bring your mind into the present moment. Emotional healing is great. Being able to see or sense things is great, but it's extremely important to be able to bring your mind back into the world of the real. Otherwise, you can get lost in those things. Okay, let's move away from me. So most of what you're seeing tonight comes from my book, Power and Presence, which Molly mentioned. And I have that YouTube channel as well. Let's move right along from here. So my main topic tonight, it's my perspective on the potential of artificial intelligence, especially generative AI and VR, to enhance or damage our authentic selves during the AI explosion, as I call it, especially in relation to the possible futures of the human mind. So this is, again, a few more of my arguments. So I think AI, as it's developing now, has the potential to either enhance human consciousness and potentials, or to greatly restrict it or damage it. Which way it's going to go, we don't know yet. And it will impact our capacity to express our authentic selves. There will be unanticipated consequences, just like to all technologies. So we can attempt to predict those, but there'll be some things we just don't see. Just like with the development of the internet. No one thought of Twitter wars before Twitter was a thing. But digital wisdom is an idea which I think can help us create deep futures in conscious relationship with technology. So they're my main ideas. So very quickly, what is critical future studies? Well, the key word here is critical. It actually developed from critical theory. So criticality is looking the way that how information and power and knowledge are mediated through systems. So it's the same critical as in, say, critical race theory or various other aspects of critical thinking. It emerged from Foucauldian philosophy, basically, which I won't go into. Some of you will know about that. So the key point here, it's not just about prediction. It's about thinking deeply about the future, trying to analyze it, the way we think about the future, and then trying to change it if we see we're going in a direction we don't like. So there's actually 6 pillars or main parts of critical future studies. Number 2, anticipating, is more to do with prediction, but I don't think that's the most important part. The first part is mapping, where you look at the past, the present, and how we see it's connected to the future, because the future doesn't just emerge randomly. The third part is timing, so we need to be clear about the kind of time we're talking about when we discuss the future. 1 year is very different from 10 years. Deepening the future is asking deeper questions about the future, not just obvious questions such as how will mobile phones become better in the future? It might be something deeper, might be what is the impact of mobile phones on consciousness? And is there some alternative to that? Now, creating term alternatives is the 5th part. So these may be ideas or futures that people don't normally discuss, such as the ones that I'm talking about today, are really alternative futures. So digital wisdom, you could say, is an alternative future. Transforming the future is the world of a strategy. How do you get from where we are to where we want to go? So what I'm doing here is really big picture thinking. So one of my main points is data obviously is not the only, is not the most important thing with big picture thinking, because the future hasn't happened yet. All we can do is collect data about the past. So Spock, it was nice to have on your team in certain situations, but not enough. Okay, so why do we need consciousness structures that are beyond the rational and the empirical? Well, first of all, we need imagination to think of alternatives. We need contemplation to understand who we are and our relationship with the world. Shadow work is also important. Why are we creating these worlds, say in AI? Does it emerge, for example, from an unconscious desire to escape from the world, which I think in part it does for some people. Deep relationship or empathy is also required with each other and with nature. Now, courage is also an important aspect of the future, because life is not easy and human beings are vulnerable. So I believe courage is also important. We need to be able to stand up even when things are difficult. So self-belief is also important. So this means you have a vision of where you want to go, and you believe at some level that you can do it. Okay, let's move along here. I'll very quickly mention a dream I had. It was just after this kind of AI explosion began. So it influenced the way that I started to think about it. Now, in this dream, it was very simple. I was on a screen using a computer, and I was kind of painting the screen using technologies. And I was kind of using my hand, and like these colors would come out, and was kind of making a beautiful painting, something that I wouldn't be able to do without the technology. And I think that was, in a way, touching into a deeper archetypal connection between the human psyche and technology. And all I want to say about that is, I think human technologies and the mind spirit are in an intimate, symbiotic relationship. And we don't really fully grasp what that is at the moment. You know, I'm not just talking about, you know, the moment that machines become conscious, which I'm a bit skeptical of in the current context. I'm talking about something that transcends the pure technology. In some way, we are deeply connected to them at a non-local level, which transcends the pure mechanics of machines. Now, integrated intelligence, which is basically the idea that we have consciousness structures which connect us non-locally to each other and the world through our physiology and also beyond our physiology. And so this is a very important idea to consider as we're designing our future web and our future technologies, because the way we think about intelligence will impact the kind of worlds that we create. So I'm just going to talk rather quickly about this idea of integrated intelligence. So as AI becomes pervasive, and it is becoming pervasive, it's hard to get away from it, and it impacts all parts or most parts of our lives, we need to expand our understanding of what intelligence is and reflect deeply on what it means to be human. We can't just let the machines lead us. So I came up with this, what I call the intelligence matrix. And this is just my way of putting down in representation the kinds of domains of mind or information that we can draw upon in the modern age or the current age. It's a bit different from the past. So AI is really the world, or what I call the World Wide Web or AI domain. And it's hard to imagine that this is not impacting us. All of us use these technologies and will probably continue to use them. So we can all draw from them. Now, the conscious mind is the traditional way we've tended to use the mind, especially in modern industrial societies. And so by definition, it's conscious. So these two parts here are really the parts that we tend to operate in for most of our lives. But there are these other four parts which I think are important. The psyche is the world of dreams and deeper states of consciousness. The body is also important. So the body has information, it collects information, and it transmits information into our awareness. Information structures and AI, our relationship with that may be retarding or negatively impacting that. So we have to make sure that we stay connected to the body because it's a source of wisdom and the authentic self. Now, the embedded mind, as I'll explain in a moment, is basically the mind which synchronizes with our immediate environment. So as you talk to people, as you connect with people, including nature, your brain synchronizes with your immediate environment. This is not esoteric. This has now become mainstream science. This is very important because it means that intelligence is not simply a function of the individual, but as a property of groups and our connection with nature. The non-local mind transcends that. This is more to do with the mystical traditions and the awakening traditions, the idea that we have a stream of information that is non-local, and we don't really quite understand what the mechanism is behind that. And of course, it's not mainstream science, but I think it's extremely important to keep that because it is part of who we are as human beings. Okay, so integrated intelligence then, by this definition, is the conscious and active employment of a fuller range of human cognitive abilities. This includes the mental, basically the head, the somatic, which is the body, digital intelligence, the intuitive, to solve problems and to live successfully. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the embedded mind. Remember, this is the more the mainstream science idea of the mind and how it's connected, or the brain synchronizes with our environments and other people. I think I'll just put these out here. Okay. So generally speaking, it's still the mainstream position that consciousness emerges from neuronal oscillations, and it's really a function of the brain only. Okay. But some researchers now are strongly disagreeing with this. And again, this is mainstream science, basically. So neural synchronization is the idea that our brains are synchronizing with the environments. Tom Froese at Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology is one person. Okay. It challenges established models. So Froese says that we need a shift in our understanding of consciousness. He talks about an extension of consciousness. Cognition may emerge from neural activity, in his opinion, but it's heavily dependent on our interactions with the world and other people. Okay, there's quite a lot of science with this. For example, when we walk with other people, our footsteps tend to synchronize with them. Our conversation, our tone tends to synchronize. Our heart rates, even. For example, when men and women make love, their heartbeats tend to synchronize. I don't know, hook people up doing that, but it must have been fun. Okay. Synchronization is about neural rhythms. Okay. Now, for example, I think I'll just go on to the next screen rather than talk about that. Oh, yes, that's where I missed it. So this has been well established through brain scanning techniques. Okay. A good example is when pilots, when they're taking off and landing the plane, which is when they need to work together, pilots and co-pilots' brains tend to synchronize. If you play a game with other people on the same team or you're working together, your brain will tend to synchronize with those people, but not if you're playing against them, which is interesting. Okay, now I'm just trying to get onto the next screen. Okay, so the importance of the idea of the embedded mind is that suggests that somatic awareness, listening to the body, is extremely important. So introspection, being able to look inside yourself. And the point is here that virtual reality or metaverse-like virtual worlds, large language models like CG, ChatGPT, and so on, these emphasize more exteroception, looking outside of yourself. You know, some of the data on the amount of time people are spending looking at phones is quite alarming. I think even I spend too much time on phones. We are in danger of losing that connection with the body and ourselves if we spend too much time mediating through screens. And the other important point is that what's on the other side of the screen is we may think we're in control. We do have some high degree of control, but it's being mediated by big tech companies, third parties. It could even be mediated by bots from other countries or terrorist organizations, and so on. And I know there's been controversy with this and electioneering and this kind of stuff. But yeah, so we're not in immediate control of who is, especially structuring the algorithms that are controlling the content and the feed that we get. Now, Web 2.0, which is basically what I would say we're in now, its values may not be strictly in accordance with the wisdom or awakening traditions. And that's something we need to keep in mind. I'm going to quickly go through this part here. Here are some precise ways that we know through the body and the environment. Okay. And I'm not going to read all this. I'm just going to quickly go through. Now, the nature effect is when we're exposed to nature, even images of nature, our brains tend to relax. And we tend to have higher levels of creativity and inspiration. We have a greater sense of abundance. Okay. Our capacity for attention increases. Okay. And now, also the ideas of awe and wonder are extremely important for developing perspective. Now, if we use our narrow vision, we lose that capacity. Our brain functions in a slightly different way, which is why if you go out under a night sky and you look at the stars, it changes your perspective on life. Or if you look at a broad expanse of nature, like a mountain or mountains or a valley, it also changes the way your brain functions. So small screens that can actually retard that capacity, especially the idea of awe and wonder. So it's important that we retain this nature effect, okay? So as I just mentioned, peripheral vision is extremely important. It also helps us improve memory, spatial memory, a capacity to relate to information spatially and connect it, okay? And this has been well studied by people like Robert Ball at Weber State University. And his argument is that instead of spending money on buying a great new phone or a computer, he said, spend money on developing or buying bigger monitors. Like in, the movie Minority Report, you have this kind of big monitor. So that's something for us to think about as we design futures. And the metaverse-like realities are actually in a really good place to be able to do this potentially. Okay, once we get around some of the problems. An all-surround perceptual field could actually help us enhance this capacity to connect with nature. Okay. So I'm having trouble seeing some of the screen because of what's on it, but interactivity is basically the manipulation of symbols when we learn, using our bodies. So this is also extremely important for learning and understanding. And I'll just give you one example here. So we have to make sure we don't lose this when we're using online systems. For example, when James Watson and Crick, this is Watson here, the guy in the bottom left-hand corner, developed the model of the DNA molecule, Watson actually fiddled around with this plastic model he had in the lab. So this is an example of interactivity. It helped him to learn his aha moment about how some of these chemical bases fitted together came through manipulating a physical object. And again, Web 2.0 tends to take us away from that, but potentially with an expanded web, we can use interactivity with virtual spaces. So it's not all bad news, I don't think. Okay. Here's just a few tools that you can use for expanding the way you use your mind during this AI explosion. We can keep how can we say, making sure that our environments are designed, enhancing the nature effect. For example, one small thing is you can make sure your office desk is near a window. That helps us sleep better, be more energetic. So this is one thing to keep in mind. Okay. And keeping a journal is extremely important for developing. It can help us develop the intuitive mind. I've kept a journal basically for years, and you can record your feelings in relation to life events and decisions and write down how you feel about them. Later, you can go back and see if there's any intelligence or information in how you felt about it intuitively and how that future unfolded. So this can help us to develop a stronger connection to the body and to intuition. It's just one way to do that. Noticing techniques are very important, I think. They're quite easy to use. These are part of awakening traditions, well studied in science. Again, this is just about bringing yourself into presence and noticing what's moving through your body. There are several different kinds of noticing techniques. But one, for example, if you feel anxious, you can slow down and see how that registers in the body and allow that part of you to speak, give it a voice, and just sit with it. And the science shows that even doing that can reduce anxiety significantly. Of course, some deeper emotional trauma, which may come up when you do that, may require more than just noticing. It could require some emotional healing. Okay. I'm going to go and move on now to the idea of stories. How much time have I got left, by the way? Am I going over time?
I think we have a few minutes here. We're
Okay.
coming up, sort of getting close, a little bit over 40 minutes, but.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So I'll have to skip a couple of things. The power of story is extremely important, not only in relation to ourselves, but in how we design our web futures. Because what we believe, or the story we tell ourselves about, say, the human mind or human beings, will inevitably reflect in the kind of virtual spaces that we create. Because stories are implicit. They have values, beliefs, metaphors, ways of knowing and ways of being, which are valorized within those stories. For example, what is our story of the universe? If it's a mechanical universe, a Newtonian universe, then we are machines, we're cogs in the machine. Another way to think of it, though, is an organic, intelligent universe. In fact, organic compounds have been found now, been detected in the early universe. An organic, intelligent universe potentially encourages us to create virtual spaces which reflect a deeper level of consciousness and help us move towards what I call a web of wisdom, which is probably the last thing I will talk about. Okay, maybe I'll just skip this part. Basically, a deep future honors deeper ways of knowing and being, including the extended mind, the embedded mind, intuition. Okay, and the web of wisdom emerges from that. In my book, I called this the mindful metaverse, but I changed the term because Mark Zuckerberg ruined it for everybody. So the metaverse tends to be a negative concept. So the web of wisdom basically means that we use the internet, we make sure we teach for digital wisdom within our virtual spaces. We don't just let the machines control what we're doing, okay? So in Web 2.0, basically, whether we realize it or not, much of what we do is being controlled or indirectly controlled by algorithms so that we can be herded into spaces to optimize profits for advertisers and big tech companies. On the right-hand side is more the web of wisdom. This is actually Jeff Bezos here, which is a slight irony. He's walking his dog. So hopefully we lead the technology and tell it what to do. Okay. So the story we have about the mind, is the mind a machine? If it is, then we're going to create web futures that are like that. Okay. So we have to be very careful of the paradigm that we put forward, the worldview that we put forward. The universe is expanding. We are learning more and more about it in terms of expansive size, but this will transcend the mere physical. We know there's possibly 20 trillion galaxies now, but our understanding of consciousness hasn't expanded in relationship with our expanded perception of the physical universe. Neo-Darwinism, the Big Bang, these ideas, I would call meta stories, big stories, but we have to be careful that they don't delimit how we think about the universe. Okay, I'm going to skip this one as we move on. So yeah, the last thing perhaps is digital wisdom, which is something that can counter this kind of shallow interpretation of AI. And it really just has three parts. Instead of just teaching people how to use the internet effectively, what, say, the algorithms can do, or ideas like bad faith actors, how Facebook might manipulate you to take your data, surveillance capitalism, these kinds of ideas. It's important, I think, to teach for introspection, to know thyself. So know the machines is understanding the basis of technology, and we can argue about which aspects of that are important to know. Knowing thyself is grounding yourself in self-awareness. Knowing the humans is understanding basically how neurophysiology functions, not necessarily at an advanced level. We can understand also how tribalism works at a basic level, so that we understand and alert to when we get pulled into those kind of situations. So digital wisdom is teaching a broader range of skills and awareness so that we can relate more consciously to the internet. So I'm going to go past all these ones because there was a little bit of detail about this, but we don't need to go into it. Okay. So I'm just going to, I guess we're right near the end. So basically the money and machines cosmos, which is Web 2.0, it's more or less confining us into a narrow range of knowing and being. So we need to make sure we honor the full range of human capacities. And I will go past this one as well. And so there was actually an opportunity for the human spirit here, because we can create these virtual futures in the image, our expanded image of self, by developing a more wise relationship with self and technology. So it's certainly not all doom and gloom. We just have to make sure that we don't accidentally trap ourselves into a kind of Web 2.0, which just becomes 3D. Okay. So this is a kind of a God moment, if you like, I think. As we're expanding the human experience into virtual worlds, we become a kind of a God in a way, because we get to create a future and the future image of human beings. We have to make sure that we keep our relationship with spirit, I believe, and digital wisdom can be part of that. The catch-22 is the current virtual worlds tend to retard those expanded levels of awareness. So there's a self-stultifying dynamic which could emerge where we trap ourselves into something more limited. And I think the last one is my last screen. Oh, yes. So basically the metaphor is we can have AI as Agent Smith, where we get trapped in this money and machines futures, or AI as Morpheus, who's like a guide who helps us to escape from the matrix. And hopefully we end up like Neo in the first movie, not the second, third, and fourth one, which I didn't particularly like, but the first one I thought was very interesting. Okay, if you care to look at this PPT, you'll see I've got a few references for me and other people. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope it wasn't too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus. This was so fascinating. And I have a couple of questions that maybe we can get started with, and as other people formulate their questions, and you can ask your question in the chat, or you can use the hand if you have a hand mechanism. Molly, I think that's what we were talking about, right? And so this might be a question that a lot of people have. To what extent can a machine, and I realize there's a lot of different predictions about this, can a machine ultimately, as a technology evolves, be self-aware? And so related to that, is, capacities to feel. I'm thinking about even like Ray Kurzweil. This was many years ago. At least his book. The Age of Intelligent Machines, the Age of Spiritual Machines.
Spiritual machines. Yeah.
So I'm just curious about there's two facets of this question. One is where do you think, if there's a threshold, past which the technology will never reach sort of in the direction of human capacities, and then if there's time, I would also like to hear your thoughts on not to be nihilistic about this, but sort of doomsday, like in the doomsday direction, what could actually, because we have like the big tech people even now are saying that something could be unleashed that is possibly the end of civilization. So let's start in the spiritual first.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can only offer my own perspective. I'm not a coder or a programmer, so I can't offer a technical explanation. However, to be quite honest, I can't see how digital computers in their current form by themselves can be conscious, because I don't think consciousness is digital in its nature, at least the way that we express it. Doesn't mean that they can't develop a lot of power or move in directions that we don't plan for. So that's something to consider. I think there's a possibility that there may be biological machine interfaces that may move us in the direction of machines that are more conscious, possibly. But it depends on what consciousness is. In the transmission theory of consciousness, of course, the brain transmits and receives consciousness structures and information as opposed to the more, neurophysiological model. If the transmission model is correct, then it's theoretically possible that a machine could access that, especially if it has some sort of biological interface. I think there's already some of the stuff occurring in biology is quite amazing. They're growing brain cells in vats, for example, and they're actually loading, I believe, computer information, data onto brain cells. And it's not my area of expertise, but I saw a story about that a few months ago. So in theory, if we develop computers, or maybe even quantum computers, which tap into something non-local or the biological, it's theoretically possible that machines may become conscious, but I can't see them becoming conscious. I mean, no matter how fast your calculator runs, I don't think it's going to become conscious, but we could lose control of it. I think that's one thing to be mindful of. So I think there's the distinction between self-awareness, or just machines which develop a certain kind of agency by doing stuff that we don't program them for. So that's the distinction. So that's probably about the best answer I can give, which is not a very convincing one, but it's something we should all keep an eye on.
Oh, great. It's so interesting. We have a question from Anil Maheshwari, who's actually going to be visiting us from Maharishi International University on November 1st. Great to see you here, Anil. And his question is,
Hi, Anil.
Hi, Marcus. Maybe I can just state it. So I
sure.
agree. I think we are also trying to write paper on AI and oneness and stuff like that, the interplay of AI and consciousness. And in the process, we just try to ask ChatGPT, can you achieve consciousness? It always says, I'm just a machine. I cannot achieve a consciousness. So that's but that's programmed. At this point, it won't concede. So we said, what about the flip side? Because a lot of people are living in very constrained consciousness for whatever reason, their attentional deficit, and sort of being, sort of the tools that we have, cell phone and all. But can AI help people develop their own consciousness? They can live more expanded lives. I thought that would be a more useful question. And if more people can live higher lives, then that can create more coherence and collective consciousness, and that could help humanity in that way. What do you think?
Yeah, that is the ideal that I'm suggesting, more or less, is that we can create web spaces that we interact with consciously. So, but I think it's important we have to do the inner work first. I wouldn't recommend going on Twitter and trying to develop self-awareness through your Twitter feed. You're going to end up probably pulling your hair out. So I think we have to do the inner work first, and then when we bring that into our relationship with machines, so we may develop an expanded awareness. Like I did all my work, emotional body work, dream work, luckily it was just before the current age took off. So when I was a young man, I didn't have the enormous distractions. I think around 2000, I think I would have been about 24 or something at that age. That's when the internet started to come in. And even when I was doing my emotional body work, like I said, I basically didn't use computers and read books for 5 years because I didn't want to get distracted. I wanted to learn to develop a base. So I think it is important that people emphasize and prioritize that space. But it is scary because I was just watching a video the other day of this girl who is a young woman, attractive woman. She's a social media influencer. She was on a podcast, and the podcast host was asking, how much time do you spend each day on social media? And she said at least 8 hours a day, scrolling and doing this stuff. And so he grabbed a phone, or she gave it to him, and he looked at the data feeds, and it's absolutely horrendous, even worse than that. So I think when it gets to that stage, it's really becoming a problem. And women tend to be more social than men, and it's a cliche, but I think there's some truth that they tend to, and from some of the research also, they tend to take feedback more seriously, such as on Instagram, and they have high levels of anxiety and social anxiety from social media. So it's extremely important we don't lose ourselves in that, I think.
Thank you. And thanks for the question, Anil. From Susan Hasty, we have a question. There seems to be a lot of collaboration occurring between biology, neuroscience, physics, philosophy and technology, information science around the active inference framework coined by Carl Friston. Have you experienced this area, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I know there's a lot going on. I wouldn't say that I'm widely read in it, though, in terms of you're talking about the kind of thing I'm talking about before was the interface of biology and machines and so on.
Right, biology,
The collaborations,
philosophy and technology. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an area that I would like to know more about, and I would certainly like to collaborate with other people. This person you met, was it Carl Fritz? Did you say?
Friston, Friston.
Friston. Yeah. So yeah, I haven't heard of him, unfortunately. But I agree it's an extremely important area, and it's not my area of expertise. But yeah, it's extremely important. So I can't really add too much to that kind of area.
Maybe can I just add a comment on Carl Friston's whole work? I think he's based in Europe. His whole thing is famous for the rubber hand experiment, if you have heard of that.
Oh, yes. Mm.
So that's how he started the whole movement like that. You can feel after a sort of just certain ways, you can actually feel the hand yours. And that is fascinating. And there's a whole bunch working there. Anil Seth and others, sort of they've talked about it, but sort of they're still scratching the head. Where's the consciousness in the machine? And I don't think none of the neuroscientists are any close to thinking. In fact, most neuroscientists, as I sort of have surveyed, have pretty much come around to the panpsychic view of consciousness, that consciousness is not inside the box, but sort of we're more like an instrument of connection, like a resonance machine rather than sort of creative machine. That's where all this. Yeah.
So those scientists, they in Asia and the West, or they more tend to be in the Asia region, or?
You mean talking about who are thinking of as a panpsychic?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, I would say that part of this only the TSC, this is size of consciousness, Hammeroff and Penrose and that whole group is pretty much convinced that it is panpsychic,
yes.
and even the Tononi group, the IIT team. So the two big theories both are pretty much in agreement, and on that account that is pretty much panpsychic. And I remember Penrose being asked the other time, "Are you still a materialist?" He says, "Yes, I'm still a materialist, but I have no clue what material is anymore." That's the whole idea of quantum sort of thing, dissolution into sort of the wholeness or oneness. Anyway, just thought yeah.
So those guys have been doing that for quite a long time. I went to the other science of consciousness folks. There's basically two science of consciousness groups, right? I went to one in Brisbane, I think in 2016, I think it was. And there was nobody at all talking about, there was Chalmers, Chalmers was talking a bit about the panpsychic, but that was more from a philosophical perspective. And there wasn't a lot of, deep thinking about the nature of consciousness that I saw in that conference. There were a lot of people there
sometimes, so this topic of non-local consciousness in this November 1st, this will be, Anil will address this from the standpoint of collective meditation practice. But Marcus, you mentioned this, it was a not insignificant part of your talk. So, my impression is that related to panpsychism, not to superficialize it, but sometimes I get the impression that it's almost like a fashion among ex-materialists, that it's like a safe haven to hide in, because like how would they, to me, the phenomenon of panpsychism actually, it could be understood radically different from a view of consciousness that acknowledged non-locality. In in my senses, a lot of the, you know, the sort of self-proclaimed sort of the new panpsychist wave would actually reject non-locality. I could be wrong on that, but I'm just it's just kind of an interesting thing to observe. And Chalmers, you mentioned David Chalmers. I mean, he's a very interesting case because he started out as a dualist in his, you know, when his big book in the early 90s, and that was an extremely radical viewpoint from the standpoint of mainstream science. And then he started going along the continuum. And I think, you know, as he put it, you start off as a materialist or maybe as a reductionist, then you go to epiphenomenalism, and then to dualism, and then to, you know, something that's, you know, maybe panpsychism is next or something like that. Oh my gosh, this topic is so huge. Okay, we have another question here from Alfredo Cabrera, and maybe he'll pose it in himself.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm
Hi, Alfredo.
a doctoral student at the University of Michigan. I'm finishing up my dissertation right now. I'm a composer, and I'm currently working with AI, specifically text to image.
Okay.
AI to I'm using it as a way to abstract experiences of trauma for an opera that
Okay.
I'm writing.
Mm.
And one of the, you know, I found really interesting your discussion about sort of intentionally crafting these technologies so that they expand our own understanding of consciousness. But one of the big difficulties that I've been facing in my work is the intrinsic bias of code.
Okay.
And you know, basically, you know, as the for the models and in these AI tools, the biases of the people that are creating are built in to these systems. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about you know, the I guess consequences, but also just the more than consequences, if there's any positives that can be found in that area, because we're basically working with the understanding of the world of someone else
That's right.
through code, and then we're interacting with that code to say something about ourselves. So
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not a coder. Yeah, it's more or less the same point I made in my presentation, that the worldview of the people who control the machines, even if it's our, is going to inevitably be transferred into the kinds of worlds that we create. So, I'm not really sure I can add anything else other than what I said already, that somehow we have to make sure that we value the kind of consciousness experiences as we create these virtual worlds and technologically embedded worlds, so that we we permit people to be able to experience them. But remember, the era of civilization we've come out of in the 20th century, basically, is, and even the Victorian England, these weren't exactly worlds that encouraged people to sit on a mountaintop and meditate. Although we did have the Romantic movement and so on. Transcendentalism was reasonably big in the United States, 1750 to 1850 and so on. But, the worlds that we've come out of and the education system have valorized a fairly narrow range of consciousness. So I think in future studies, we talk about, who controls things, who mediates the power. So a part of that is working out who does that, at least being conscious of who does that, and then attempting to strategize ways in which to challenge that. And that's not easy. Universities, for example, are very powerful. The people that work in them, and inevitably administrators want to butter their own bread, so to speak. So I don't really have any concrete solutions to that. I'm just trying to think if there's anybody I know who's actually out there attempting to challenge that, the point you made in that way. I can't think of anybody offhand. Maybe, do you know of anybody that's going out into maybe tech companies and doing that kind of thing?
Not really. It's all, I feel like the tools are being developed without
Mm,
being conscious of all of these things. Like, of course, they are discussed in the literature, but as like from being aware of them to addressing them, that bridge isn't being built. And it's being left up to the individual to become aware of those biases when you
mm,
them. And it often comes to a point where you can't really go around them because the models are so deeply biased
mm.
that it's you just have to pick which of the available
Okay.
tools is least biased.
Yes. Well, the thing is, you can't really, at an individual level, you can't wait until, the machine masters give us permission to do this kind of exploration. And this is kind of, I don't know, a self-contradiction in a way. If people aren't aware, how do they begin the journey? In my case, I began the journey from trauma because I was so badly damaged from my childhood, I just didn't fit in. And I could see that I wasn't going to be able to function normally in society. Some people might call this the sacred wound. But if we leave it up to individuals, then it's up to individuals to go out and to work in society and to plant seeds. That's one way to think of it. Some cultures and societies have been transformed in that way. In the Scandinavian countries, for example, beginning around the early 20th century, they developed these very progressive societies, which are not necessarily consciousness-based, but very humane, progressive, tolerant. And they did this. Some people started up some, what did they call them? Like schools where, I forget what they call them offhand. I think it's in my book actually. But they trained about 10% of the population to learn about these kind of value structures, personal responsibility, and these people later went out into society and transformed society in that way. So you need a certain subset of society to have the understanding and hopefully then the courage to go out and to do something about it. That's a very general point, I know, but maybe you can be one of those people that go out there. Alfredo.
And I'm looking at the chat list, and Susan Hasty, I wondered if you wanted to, if you're inclined to just comment a little bit more about your question. You added a little bit afterwards. Maybe she's not here. But, one of the things that strikes me about this topic is, in the academy, we always talk about intersectionality. And this is where Susan's point between biology, neuroscience, physics, philosophy, and everything. I mean, it's really, it's one of these things. And Mark, you talk about imagination and that sort of thing. And I think all of these, I'm thinking back to the kinds of talks we're having too. The questions that are raised are really what is the human being, and we're at a point in human evolution and a juncture where the future of civilizations really in the balance where the academy really needs to be asking these big questions. And this is one of the really powerful things about your talk. And just to give people a little review, we had I'm just thinking we had, you mentioned the UFO. Your UFO story was a really great story. We had Avi Loeb from Harvard Astrophysics talking about his work on recovering artifacts and his idea that there are artifacts that are actually indicative of alien intelligence. We had Kimberly Pemberty from the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies talking about consciousness that survives bodily death. Going back a little bit, Julia Mossbridge was actually talking about our future selves actually visiting us, being visited, and actually influencing the present, the future. Speaking about future studies. And so that's what, one of the things that we're really excited about doing is just programming talks that stimulate this kind of imagining and creative, just expanding the edges of our sense of wonder and awe. That was another theme that I like. I just love the connection with nature too, because in some ways nature and technology are being pitted against each other, and we really have to solve that. So this is just really wonderful, Marcus. And then just a couple of words about Anil's talk on November 1st and the transformative impact of collective meditation practice. And there's very interesting studies coming out on this. And again, so the question of sort of within the context of non-locality, the sort of a subset intersubjective consciousness. In some ways, we could say, well, one contains the other, but I think consciousness studies really, I think needs to be more, give us a more nuanced account of that relationship. I mean, it's one thing to say that consciousness is non-local, but to take the step of intersubjectivity is like, I mean, that's a huge step with incredible ramifications.
Yes.
And that's where we're at. So, and I don't know if Marcus, you wanted to give us a few concluding remarks inspired by any of the questions.
Ed, just very quickly.
Yeah, Molly.
Yeah,
please.
we have two. Carl has a question, and then Susan just re-entered with her hand up. So maybe Carl, you could ask. I think we just have maybe 10 minutes, but Carl, if you wanted to ask your question, and then we could have Susan ask her question, and Marcus could give us some closing words. I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure if you could see the hands up.
I did not. Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Molly. So Marcus, when you talked about Victorian England, I believe it was, if you read the Theosophist, Annie Besant, Charles Ledbetter from that period,
yes.
There's all kinds of, I mean, almost 20 years ago, I heard one of the former directors of the BARC in India, the Atomic Physics Lab, talk about occult chemistry and how that the psychics, how about they beginning in the late 19th century discovered not only quarks, but a further subdivision. And it's mind-boggling. The information just sits there and it's almost never acted upon. And when you read their stuff, everything they talk about consciousness and visions it's mind-boggling, and it seems to get very little traction these days. So if you're unaware of it, I was a bit curious about that.
Yeah, you're right, and I do know something about it. Yes, I know there's always been an undercurrent, at least, of mysticism and spiritual endeavor and inquiry. I mean, people like Steiner and Swedenborg, and lots of people, and you mentioned, Besant and those kind of people. So they're there even through the 20th century. The New Age movement could be considered a part of this, and some of the counter culture revolutions. The trippy guys. What would you call them? Timothy Leary and those kind of people have always been around. But yeah, they've tended to be pushed out of the mainstream. But there are some suggestions that psychedelics as one possible indicator that people are starting to open up the mind to consider other possibilities. I'm not really into psychedelics myself, but at least suggests that people are expanding the possibilities of consciousness and the way they see it. But I take your point. Yeah, these people have been around, and lots of people there probably be lots of people we don't know about who just lived and died and had enormous insights into these areas. That's one of the, I guess you could call it a tragedy of human history if you look at it that way. But hopefully, I believe that the work that we do ourselves does contribute to the human collective. So the work you do on yourself, including the healing, I think does touch on others, even if unfortunately you don't become, a star or something like that.
Susan?
Yes, thank you. I'm starting to learn about using dual monitors, and so I was trying to find my way around. So I've been here all the time, and thank you, Dr. Anthony. In reading your book, I think that there's a lot of correlations actually between the points you make and active inference, which really has a lot to do with embodiment and extended mind. But you know what? As soon as we dive into technology, I think that there's a lot of people who miss the point that you make, and the statement that there is no empowerment without embodiment.
Mhm.
You know, is so powerful, but it's very nuanced. And so, can you in your book you actually talk about the drama triangle, and
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can kind of expand on that and how that might keep us trapped into not doing the work.
Okay. So I think you must be talking about my book, Discover Your Soul Template, are you? Because I talked about the drama triangle in that book.
Power and presence.
Okay. So it's in there
But
as
yeah,
well.
just
So
more along the lines of
yes.
how you came about that, but also the importance of the work is never ending, and
Yeah.
the the collective trauma we
Mm.
tend to discount in terms of how it's so easy to get into our mental state, and
Yes.
and that kind of clouds the work we really need to do. I'd like to hear more about your
Mm.
thoughts on that.
So the drama triangle was actually taught to me by my teachers, but I think it may have come from John Bradshaw or someone like that originally. So it's not originally my idea, but basically the idea is that there's a persecutor, a savior, and a victim in many dramas that we have in our relationships. But the most important thing that I took from drama is that it tends to operate unconsciously, and we often are giving our power away. And I found this. I still do this myself. It's it's like you mentioned. It's really lifelong work, and much of it does emerge from our trauma and the stories and the beliefs that develop from our childhood. And I believe that when we're born, we tend to download, if you want to use that word, consciousness structures from our ancestors and our parents, and probably past lives as well. Although that's another idea altogether. But basically, these ideas that move through us, or these fields of consciousness, including emotionality and trauma, they can be positive, I think, as well. We can inherit some gifts as well, but because the way our mind functions, we tend to be on the alert for things that can trigger pain and suffering. We often tend to unconsciously create dramas or dynamics in relationships to help us avoid our pain. And the most common one is avoiding the pain of abandonment and the fear of death. And so this is what I found by doing a lot of the emotional body work with other people. So that's the main issue as well. When I go really deeply into the shadow, that's really what sits there. It's the fear of abandonment and death. Okay, but you really have to go into it to be able to. I never realized that was really there at a very deep level until I went into it, and it's quite frightening to see it or to experience it actually. But I think no matter what it is that's in there, you can actually sit with it and learn to sit with it and develop a conscious relationship with it. And if you can do that, then it starts to lose its power over you. And at the very least, you can become a witness to the dramas that you're unconsciously creating. Because my mother, for example, didn't really accept me or love me, there's a part of me that wants to give my power away to women. So, and I do it. Even to this day, there's a part of me that wants to do it. And it's not just in the real physical world, but it's through the consciousness structures that I'm embedded in. I'll find that I'm entangled with some woman somewhere. I don't tell my wife about this, but this is a normal part of human consciousness structures. We're all entangled with each other, including people from our past, or even people that we may be encountering in the present. So part of awareness is if you can do the work, you can actually at least see what you're doing and begin to work on bringing into conscious awareness the dynamics that underpin it, which is really about what I call original pain, looking at or connecting with the pain and trauma from our childhood or through our ancestral lines or wherever it comes from. So that's all I'll say about that for the moment.
Thanks, Susan. Molly, do you have any thoughts in terms of?
I thought tonight was fascinating. I think a lot about the way our thoughts echo. And even when we're unaware of it, how what we're feeling and thinking is impacting other people. And I found myself feeling that in so much of what you were thinking, how it was echoing through this group and beyond what we were just doing on this Zoom screen. I really appreciated the talk. I saw one comment on here from that I didn't think we got to read from Diana, just that she was feeling encouraged, that she thinks AI can help humans develop their consciousness by providing awareness and insight about the self and others through exponentially hyperconnectedness, which is, I think, I was using the word echo to say that same thing,
Yes.
which can serve as a mirror effect to the self, along with increased sharing, learning, and osmosis of knowledge. Oh, Diane, I hadn't read that comment. I think that's what I was trying to say, but you said it better than I did. So thank you. You have a lot of other thank yous, and I've enjoyed being with you. I think that's it for me, Ed, unless you have anything else to say.
No, I mean, just to echo those things, and you know what, I'm going to make a prediction. I think this is a topic that we're going to be revisiting, and maybe Marcus will invite you back if you're available in a year or two or something like that, just to kind of compare notes, because I mean, obviously this area is really exploding so quickly that who knows what the sort of the scope of the conversation will be at that point. But this is we're so happy we can make this work.
Yeah, thank you, Ed and Molly. And you remember, we're using AI in a certain sense right now, right? So it's a very positive thing, as you several people have mentioned, that we can connect in this way with these technologies, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago especially, it would not have been possible in this way anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and have safe travels as you race out the door. Marcus is on his way to a vacation, so we can all wish you good night and bon voyage.
Yes,
have a safe journey. Enjoy your time away, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah, thanks everyone who came in to listen as well. I really appreciate everything. So it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Marcus.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.